That bracelet costs $50,000, and it doesn't belong to you." I said those words with the same calm I use when closing a business deal. Not loud, not shaken, just clear, precise, and final. The way you speak when you've already won. But let me take you back, because this story didn't start with handcuffs and champagne flutes and a room full of people watching a woman get exactly what she deserved. This story started the way most betrayals do, quietly, invisibly, buried under years of love and sacrifice, and a woman who was too busy building something real to notice her foundation was rotting. My name is Sarah, and I want to tell you everything. I grew up understanding that nothing in this world comes without work. My mother cleaned other people's houses. My father drove a delivery truck for 31 years. They never complained. They just worked. And somewhere along the way, watching them pour themselves into every single day without apology or self-pity, I decided I would build something of my own. Something no one could take away from me. By my late 20s, I had a small event planning company. Just me and a laptop and a second-hand desk in the corner of a studio apartment. I made calls during my lunch breaks, sent proposals at midnight, drove to venues on weekends to measure rooms and negotiate rates. It was exhausting and exhilarating and completely mine. Then I met Lucas. He was charming in that effortless way that certain men are charming, like sunlight. You don't question it. You just feel warm. He was tall, well-spoken, quick with a laugh, and he had this particular talent for making you feel like you were the only person in a room. He would look at you, and really look. And for a woman who had spent most of her adult life with her eyes on a spreadsheet or a contract, being truly seen felt extraordinary. We dated for 2 years. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in my apartment. No grand gesture, no restaurant, no audience. He said he didn't need all that. He said what we had was between us. I thought it was romantic. Now I understand it differently. We got married on a warm Saturday in October, 10 years ago. The wedding was small, tasteful. I designed every detail myself, because by then I had learned that if you want something done beautifully, you do it yourself. 60 guests. Cream roses, a string quartet. Lucas stood at the altar looking like every promise I'd ever made to myself made flesh, and I cried because I believed it. I genuinely, completely believed it. The first few years were good. At least, I thought they were. Looking back now, I can trace the hairline fractures I ignored because I was always too busy, too focused, too trusting to let myself follow them. Lucas had ambitions, vague, shifting ambitions. He wanted to start a consulting firm. Then, he wanted to invest in real estate. Then, he was going to write a book. Then, he was exploring opportunities in sustainable development. There was always something just around the corner, always a next thing, a big idea, a plan that required time and space and, quietly and consistently, money. My money. I want to be honest with you, because that's what this story demands. I am not telling you I was naive. I am telling you I chose to believe. There is a difference. I knew Lucas floated. I knew he was restless, and that his ambitions never quite crystallized onto action. But I told myself that different people contribute differently. I told myself that while I built the business, he was building himself. I was patient. I was generous. I was, in the most dangerous possible way, in love. My company grew. Slowly at first. Then, with the kind of momentum that catches you by surprise, we started booking corporate events, then private galas. Then we landed a contract with a hotel group that changed everything. I hired a team. I moved into a real office. I went from surviving to thriving, and every milestone felt like proof that all those nights I stayed up alone while Lucas slept were worth something. He never said he was proud of me. Not once, not directly, not in the way that lands. He would say things like, "Your company's doing well," with a slight emphasis on "your" that I trained myself not to hear. He would make jokes at dinner parties about how Sarah ran the show, how he was just along for the ride, and everyone would laugh and I would smile, and something small and quiet would flinch inside me. But I loved him. So I stayed. So I kept building. So I kept signing the checks. The business account I'm going to tell you about, the one that changed everything, was one I created specifically to separate personal and company finances. My accountant had been pushing for it for years, and I finally set it up cleanly, with proper documentation, with all assets registered under the company name for insurance and tax purposes. Every piece of jewelry I wore to professional events, because in the event planning world, your appearance is your brand, was logged as a company asset, cataloged, photographed, insured, serial numbered. I didn't know then how important that paperwork would become. I found out on a Thursday morning in March. I was sitting in my office reviewing vendor contracts when my phone buzzed with a bank notification, a transaction alert from the business account. I had set them up for anything over $5,000 because our invoices ran high, and I liked to know what was moving. The alert said $50,000. I stared at it. I read it again. Then I opened the banking app and stared at the transaction details, and for a long moment, my mind simply refused to process what I was seeing. It was a purchase from a jeweler, a private, high-end jeweler downtown whose name I recognized because I had attended one of their client events 2 years prior. The transaction was authorized using the secondary card on the account, the card I had issued for Lucas because sometimes he handled vendor meetings when I was traveling. $50,000 to a jeweler, and I had not bought a single thing. I sat very still. My office was quiet. I could hear my assistant on the phone in the next room, cheerful and professional, confirming a catering order. Outside my window, the city went on completely as usual. Taxis and pedestrians and pigeons and clouds. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that. I didn't cry, and I didn't scream, and I didn't call Lucas. I just sat there and breathed, and something inside me, some soft, hopeful, believing part of me, closed its eyes and quietly went to sleep. And something else woke up. I called the jeweler directly. I introduced myself by my full name, my company name, and I informed them calmly that I was reviewing a recent transaction made on my business account, and I needed to confirm the purchase details for my records. The woman on the phone was courteous. She pulled up the transaction. A custom-designed diamond bracelet, white gold setting, princess-cut stones, bespoke order. Picked up 2 days ago. Picked up by Lucas. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat with that for a moment. Then I asked one more question, because I had been in business long enough to know that information is power, and the moment to collect it is before the other side knows you're collecting. I asked if the piece had been given a certification and documentation package. It had. Serial numbers, authentication papers, the works. I asked if they could email a copy of the full documentation to my business email, since the purchase was on my company account. They did, within the hour, and now I had everything I needed. Here is what I didn't do. I did not go home and confront Lucas. I did not call a friend and cry. I did not look through his phone or his emails, or follow him in my car. I had no interest in the details of his betrayal. I didn't need to know her name, or how long it had been, or what he told her about me. None of that information would have changed the facts, and the facts were already complete. He had stolen $50,000 from my company account. He had used it to buy a gift for another woman. He had done this with full knowledge that the account was mine, that the money was mine, that the business was mine. That was all I needed. What I did instead was call my attorney. Her name is Diane, and she has been my lawyer for 6 years. And she is the kind of woman who listens to everything before she says a single word. And when she finally speaks, every word counts. I told her what I had found. I told her about the account, the card, the purchase, the documentation. I told her I wanted to understand my options before I made any move. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sarah, that bracelet was purchased with a company card, which makes it potentially a company asset, especially if you can establish that it was acquired using business funds without authorization." I told her it was already logged in our system as a company asset, because I had our bookkeeper add it to the register that same afternoon, backdated to the purchase date with the serial number from the jeweler's documentation, and cross-referenced against the transaction on the company account. Diane was quiet again, longer this time. Then she said, "That is either the most prepared thing I have ever heard, or you've been planning this longer than today." I told her I had not been planning it. I told her I had simply spent 15 years building a business that ran on documentation and precision, and those habits don't stop working just because someone hurts you. She told me to sit tight. She told me she would draw up the asset registration and make sure the insurance was updated to include the piece. She told me to say absolutely nothing to Lucas, to behave as though everything was completely normal, and to wait. I asked her what I was waiting for. She said, "The right moment." Now, here is something about me that you should understand. People have called me cold. My whole life, people have called me composed, controlled, difficult to read. Colleagues who don't know me well find me intimidating, even some who do. Lucas used to joke that I was made of marble. He meant it as a compliment, I think, or at least he thought he did. But the way he said it sometimes, with a slight edge, a slight distance, made me think he also meant it as a complaint. What people don't understand is that I'm not cold. I feel everything. I feel it deeply and completely, and sometimes overwhelmingly. But I was raised by people who worked with their hands and never let anyone see them buckle, and somewhere in childhood, that became the shape of my dignity. I do not perform my pain. I contain it, and I direct it, and I do not release it until I choose to. Lucas thought my silence meant I didn't know. He never understood that my silence was the strategy. In the weeks that followed, I watched him. Not obsessively, not with the desperation of a woman trying to catch a liar. I already knew he was lying. That part was done. I watched him the way I watch a negotiation unfold. I watched to understand the full picture. I noticed things I had been choosing not to see for a long time. The way he tilted his phone away when he was texting. The evenings he came home slightly too polished, as if he'd freshened up somewhere before walking through the door. The phone calls he took outside, standing in the backyard with his back to the house, his voice low. The particular lightness in his manner when we were at social events, the way he worked the room with a kind of rehearsed ease, like a man who had somewhere better to be, and was enjoying the performance of pretending otherwise. I served him dinner. I asked about his day. I laughed at the appropriate moments. I went to bed beside him every night and stared at the ceiling in the dark and breathed through it. It was, I will admit to you now, one of the hardest things I have ever done. Not because I still loved him, or not only because of that, but because grief and fury and hurt are loud, and keeping them quiet takes everything. I was holding a building together with my bare hands every single day, smiling at my staff, managing client calls, running a company, being normal, being fine, being Sarah, and underneath all of it, I was waiting. Then the gala. Our 10th anniversary gala had been planned for months. It was ostensibly a dual celebration, our decade of marriage and the company's 10th year in business. Our company's 10th year, let me be precise about that. My company's 10th year. But we had framed it as a shared milestone because that was the narrative we had built, and I saw no reason to dismantle it prematurely. The gala was our biggest event of the year, over 300 guests, held at the Grand Harrington, black tie, the kind of evening that gets photographed and written about in the city's social pages. It was, in other words, the perfect stage. 2 weeks before the event, while reviewing the final guest list with my events director, I noticed a name I didn't recognize. I asked who had added the name. My director checked her notes and told me it had come in through Lucas, a +1 addition, a friend he wanted to include. I looked at the name for a long moment. Then I said, "Of course. Keep her on the list." I called Diane that evening. I told her the Mistress would be attending the gala. I told her what I was thinking. There was a very long silence on Diane's end of the line. Then she said, "If you do this, you have to do it exactly right. No improvisation. No emotion. Every step documented and legally clean." I said, "When have you ever known me to improvise?" She helped me draft the police report in advance, everything prepared, the asset registered and insured and documented, the serial number confirmed against the jeweler's records, the authorization trail showing that the card used was not authorized for personal purchases over a specific threshold without my countersignature. We had everything ready. We just needed to wait for her to walk in wearing it, because I was almost certain she would. Think about it from her perspective. She had been given a custom $50,000 bracelet by a man she believed was wealthy and successful and building a life that included her. She had been invited to his anniversary gala. She had, in her mind, been brought into the inner circle. Of course she would wear it. It would be a statement. A quiet, private, devastating statement aimed directly at me. Except she didn't know I already knew. And she didn't know that bracelet was the rope she was about to hang herself with. The night of the gala arrived. I got dressed alone in my bedroom. I had chosen my gown weeks earlier. Deep midnight blue, structured, simple, the kind of dress that says, I am not trying to impress you. I simply cannot help it. I wore the pearl drop earrings that had been my mother's. No other jewelry. I had considered wearing the diamond necklace from our collection but decided against it. I wanted nothing on my body that night that could distract from what was coming. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time before I went downstairs. I looked at the woman in the glass, 41 years old, steady hands, clear eyes, 10 years of a marriage that had turned out to be something other than what she thought. 15 years of a company she built from absolute zero. And I said to her, quietly, just between us, you are the only thing in this room that is entirely yours. Then I went to the gala. The Grand Harrington was extraordinary that night. My team had outdone themselves. Candlelight and white flowers, and the kind of ambient warmth that makes everyone look their best and feel just slightly elevated. The room filled steadily with faces I knew. Clients, vendors, friends, the mayor's deputy, 3 city council members, journalists, the kind of crowd that makes news just by being in the same room together. Lucas was already there when I arrived because he had gone ahead to handle something, or so he said. He came to greet me near the entrance, and he looked good. I'll give him that. He kissed my cheek and took my hand, and smiled at me with those eyes that used to make me believe everything he said. And for just a moment, standing there in that candlelit room, I felt the ghost of who I had been. The woman who trusted him. The woman who built a life around a version of him that, it turned out, had never quite been real. I smiled back. I squeezed his hand. I said, "This is gonna be a night to remember." He had no idea. I moved through the room with the practiced ease of a woman who has hosted hundreds of events. I greeted guests, accepted congratulations, made small talk, laughed at the right moments. My events director kept giving me reassuring glances from across the room. She didn't know all of it, but she knew enough. My assistant knew nothing, but was watching me with the particular alertness of someone who senses that the evening is about more than it appears. About 40 minutes into the cocktail hour, I saw her. She came in through the main entrance with a small group, dressed beautifully. I'll be fair, she had taste, in a deep emerald gown. She was younger than me, maybe 34, with dark hair and a kind of bright, restless energy that I recognized immediately as the energy of someone performing confidence they don't entirely feel. And on her wrist, catching the light with every movement, was the bracelet. My bracelet. My $50,000. My company asset, wearing a serial number that I already had filed in triplicate, with my attorney, my insurer, and the police. I watched her from across the room. She didn't see me looking. She was scanning the space, finding her bearings, and then she found Lucas across the room, and something passed between them. A glance, just a glance, brief and electric and entirely damning. And I felt it land in my chest like a stone dropped in still water. I breathed through it. I did not move. I went back to my guests. I had champagne. I smiled and nodded and asked after people's children and their travel plans and their summer houses. And I waited for the toast. It was Lucas who had insisted on a toast. He had planned it weeks ago, presented it to me as a romantic gesture, a public declaration. He wanted to stand in front of 300 of our closest friends and business associates and say something meaningful about our 10 years together. I had agreed with warmth and gratitude, because at the time I didn't know what I know now, and also because by the time I did know, the toast had already become part of the plan. He took the microphone at 9:15 after dinner, when the room was full and the champagne was flowing, and everyone was glowing with that particular collective glow of people who are comfortable and well-fed and believe the night is nothing more than what it appears. Lucas was, I will say this, a natural public speaker. He had the voice and the manner and the particular skill of making a room feel like he was speaking to each person individually. He began with a joke that landed, moved into something sentimental about the early days of our relationship, and then turned to look at me with those eyes and said, "And I will remember this forever. 10 years. And through everything, what I've learned is that the most important thing in any life is honesty. Real, genuine honesty. The kind that holds everything together." The room murmured appreciatively. Several people looked at me. I smiled. And then I reached into my evening bag, and I took out my phone. I had 2 calls ready. Diane had helped me prepare them. The first was to Officer Martin, who was already stationed outside with 2 colleagues, alerted and briefed and waiting. The second was to the jeweler, who had been contacted that afternoon and had confirmed his availability to receive my call and verify the item details on request. I stood up. I walked to the small elevated platform where Lucas was standing with the microphone. He turned to me with a smile that faltered slightly, just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, as he saw my expression. I took the microphone gently from his hand. I said, "I'd like to add something, if you don't mind." The room settled, quiet and attentive. I said, "This has been an extraordinary 10 years. And Lucas is right. Honesty is what holds everything together. So tonight, in the spirit of honesty, I need to take care of a small business matter. I apologize in advance for the interruption." I put my phone on speaker. The first call was to the jeweler. He answered on the second ring, professional and clear, and I asked him to confirm the details of a specific purchase made on my business account in March. The custom diamond bracelet, white gold, princess cut, serial number confirmed against our documentation. He confirmed all of it, every detail, the account name, the transaction, the serial number. The fact that the piece was registered as a company asset under Sarah Whitfield Events, LC. The room was absolutely silent. I said, "Thank you," and ended that call. Then I looked across the room to where she was standing. I looked at the bracelet on her wrist, and I said, clearly, without anger, without heat, without anything but the calm certainty of a woman who has done everything correctly, "That bracelet costs $50,000, and it doesn't belong to you." I made the second call. Officer Martin and his colleagues were inside within 90 seconds. What followed is both exactly what you're imagining, and somehow, more than you're imagining. The sound of the room, that collective intake of breath, that particular quality of shock in a crowd of 300 people. The way she looked first at the bracelet, then at Lucas, then at me, with an expression that traveled through disbelief and fury and fear so fast it almost seemed like one expression. The way Lucas stood completely still, not moving, not speaking, just standing there with his champagne glass in his hand, going very pale, understanding, I think, in those seconds, the full dimensions of what I had known and what I had done and how long I had been doing it. She did not come quietly. She said things. Her voice rose. She said the bracelet was a gift. She said she had nothing to do with any of this. She said there must be a mistake. And Officer Martin was patient and professional and entirely unmoved, because I had given them everything they needed, and there was no mistake, and everyone in that room knew it. They escorted her out. As she passed me, and she did pass me, there was nowhere else to walk. She looked at me with an expression I don't have a single word for. Something between hatred and devastation, and, underneath both of those, something that looked almost like recognition. I looked back. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. After she was gone, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then, the way rooms do, it began to murmur again, and the murmur grew, and I could feel the event tilting on its axis towards something irrecoverable. Lucas was still standing on the platform. He had put down the champagne. He looked at me, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw him without the charm, without the ease, without the particular performance he had been giving his whole life. He looked like what he was, a man who had been living on borrowed foundations and had just watched them all disappear in the span of 4 minutes. I walked to him. I stood close enough that only he could hear me, and I said, quietly and without any pleasure in it, "My attorney will be in touch Monday morning. The account, the card, the bracelet, the unauthorized use. It's all documented. I suggest you get a very good lawyer." Then I turned, and I went back to my guests. I want to tell you something true. It did not feel triumphant in the way I thought it would. I had imagined in those weeks of waiting that when the moment came, there would be some great release, some flooding warmth of satisfaction, some sense of scales finally balancing. And there was some of that. I won't pretend there wasn't. But more than triumph, what I felt was tired. I felt the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been carrying something enormous for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Not joy, exactly. Not victory. Just the absence of the weight. The sudden, shocking lightness of a body that no longer has to brace. I stayed at the gala for another hour. My events director kept the evening moving with remarkable professionalism. I have always hired well. And eventually the music came back up, and people had more wine. And the way that human beings manage to normalize extraordinary things began to do its work. There were still conversations that I knew would generate whispers for weeks. There were still stares and careful glances, and people who kept finding reasons to come speak to me directly, looking at my face for clues about what they were supposed to do with what they had just witnessed. I gave them nothing. I was gracious and warm and entirely opaque. And at 10:30 I said my goodnights, and I left. Lucas did not come home that night. I didn't expect him to. I drove home alone in the quiet car, and I walked into the house I had bought, the house I had furnished, the house I had filled with a life I had paid for and built and maintained. And I went to the kitchen and made myself tea. Then I went to the balcony. It was a clear night. The city spread out below me in all its lit indifference, and I stood there with my tea. And I breathed the cool air, and I listened to the silence that comes after everything loud has finally ended. I thought about my mother, who cleaned other people's houses and never let anyone see her buckle. I thought about the second-hand desk in the studio apartment. I thought about the first contract I ever signed, the handshake that shook because I was so nervous and so desperate to be taken seriously. I thought about every late night and every early morning and every moment I had chosen the company when I could have chosen sleep, chosen rest, chosen ease. I thought about Lucas at the altar in October, 10 years ago, looking like every promise I'd ever made to myself. And I thought about the bracelet, those diamonds, those precise, cold, beautiful stones, sitting in their white gold setting, documented and registered and serial numbered, and mine in every way that the law recognizes ownership. I thought about how much I had believed in things that turned out not to be real, and how the things that turned out to be real were the ones I made with my own hands. The diamonds were just stones. My freedom, though, the company, the account, the documentation, the 15 years of building something no one could take away from me, that was priceless. That had always been priceless. I had just been too busy being a wife to remember that I was also, and first, myself. I stood on that balcony for a long time, and then, for the first time in weeks, maybe longer if I am honest, I breathed without holding anything back. There is something I want to say to you directly before we close this story, because I think about the woman I was at the beginning, the one who sat in her office staring at that bank notification, who felt something inside her quietly go to sleep. And I want her to know something. I want every woman who has ever chosen to stay silent because she didn't want to seem suspicious or jealous or difficult or cold. Every woman who has ever swallowed something enormous to keep the peace. To hear this, your silence is not weakness. Your patience is not stupidity. Your ability to hold yourself together while you decide what to do next is not a failure to feel. It is, in fact, the most powerful thing you possess. Lucas thought my silence meant I didn't know. He thought my composure meant I was oblivious. He thought that because I built quietly and worked quietly and loved quietly, I would also be hurt quietly and stay quietly and accept quietly. He was wrong about all of it. Never mistake a woman's silence for ignorance. If you build your lifestyle on her hard work, on her account, on her decades of early mornings and late nights and relentless, unglamorous effort, do not be surprised when she decides to take the floor out from under you. She probably already has. She's just waiting for the right moment. Now, before we finish, I want to ask you something. Picture yourself at that gala. Picture looking across the room and seeing your own money, your own sacrifice, your own $50,000 glittering on someone else's wrist. What would you do? Leave me a comment. Tell me. I want to know what kind of silence you would choose. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, think something, recognize something, then you know where to find more. Subscribe. Stay close. Because the women in these stories are real, and their justice is quiet, and it is always, always coming.